Welcome to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month Symposium. Our theme today is the role of libraries, museums, and archives in engaging with local communities. We have a lot of amazing speakers today who will share information about the things they are doing in their local communities. But before we get to our amazing speakers, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Anthony Chow. Dr. Chow is the director of the School of Information here at San Jose State University. Dr. Chow?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Anthony Chow, the director of San Jose State's School of Information. I want to thank all of you for joining us and welcome to our celebration and recognition of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander History Month. This title really helps establish the immense diversity in our community. Chat is on, and so please take a moment to share in chat where you are joining us from. It's always great to see the diversity of attendees. It gives me and the school great pleasure to support equity, diversity, and inclusion in all of its beauty and power. And I want to thank our outstanding speakers and panelists for joining us today. The theme of today's symposium is the role of libraries, museums, and archives in engaging with local communities. And this is a part of our EDI Symposium series sponsored by the iSchool. All of our symposia recordings and resources will be available in our EDI library. And please subscribe to our brand new EDI YouTube channel at SJSU iSchool_EDI. For today's sessions, if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature, and someone from our distinguished panel will answer it. Also, periodically, we'll make chat available so that you can Q&A. Today's symposium is, of course, personal for me. I want to dedicate today to my father, who recently passed away. He left medical school in Hong Kong once he received word that he and his family were one of the less than 300 Chinese families given permission to immigrate to the U.S. He and my mother used to call the U.S. Gold Mountain, and he first landed in Hawaii, became a busboy in a Chinese restaurant in San Francisco before attending Texas Tech, where he met my mother, and then earned his doctorate in chemistry from Florida State University. His legacy and that of his two sons are both professors at well-known universities. We both have 3 children, and we will continue to honor his hard work and sacrifice in his name. His final gift to my mother and the family, 63 years together, is a sizable estate that continues the strong roots that we are putting down into this country. Despite all of the racism and feeling like a perpetual foreigner, quite often as he grew up and as we grew up in the U.S., we're so proud to be Asian, Chinese American, and our roots now run deep. I'm so honored and impressed by all of the outstanding speakers that have taken the time to join us today. And so now over to Tanya San Nicolas Roca.
Thank you, Dr. Chow. So my name is Dr. Tanya San Nicolas Roca, and my family is from Guam, which is the territory of the United States. And, Anthony, Dr. Chow talked about his dad. My dad was born and raised in Guam. He was born during World War II, and he was actually born in a cave due to the war that was taking place during that time. And the way his family was able to stay safe was to go into the caves. And of course, there's not a lot of caves there, but it just so happened that my family, my grandfather's side of the family, they were farmers, and they just happened to live in an area where there were caves available. And so, yeah, my dad was born in a cave. Like I said, Guam is a territory of the United States. It's part of the Micronesian Islands. And he came to the United States, or to the mainland United States, as after he enlisted in the Army. And he retired from the Army, but the culture is very strong. It's a very strong culture. And one of the issues with the Chamorro culture is that especially on Guam, and maybe it's more in particular with my family, but it's we're losing the language. And we have a speaker who's going to be talking about the Chamorro culture and what she's doing on the island of Saipan, which is also a Micronesian island. But so with my own experience with I am not able to speak Chamorro, sadly, other than to say a few words and just some little things that my dad taught me along the way. But so my research was actually involving the use of information systems to preserve Chamorro culture. I'm hoping to do more in that area, and I hope to see a lot more work in the area of preserving different cultural, experiences, the knowledge, and everything that surrounds your culture. And it's just good to be able to preserve what we have today, so we have it for our, the next generations to come. But with that said, I would like to pass on the mic to Dr. Lena Kupuni Reynolds, who is an associate curator at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, with a focus on Native Hawaiian history and culture. Dr. Kupuni Reynolds, I'm going to allow you to share your screen, if you don't mind.
Sounds great, and thank you for that introduction. Let me do this really quickly. Oh, you're still seeing the lecture, the main thing, yeah. Okay, let me do this one more time. Okay, that should be the correct view, yes? Good, okay. So, excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather today, but ano ai me kia aloha e nā hoa makamaka I a kua mai nei I ki ala. Ma ke ia kahua pa'a no ka ho'olohe ana mai I ke a pānela ha'i o lelo no ka mahina ma o me heu o ka po'e Amelika a kia, a me ka po'e o ka moana nui a kia. So greeting friends and colleagues, and thank you for joining us today to listen to our panel in celebration of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I want to begin by thanking the iSchool and Dr. Tonya San Nicolas Puka for inviting me to join you all again. As some of you may recall, I was on a keynote panel in November in celebration of Native American Heritage Month. And joining me for that conversation was Jennifer Himmelreich and Richard Sneed, and much of our conversation centered around the challenges and opportunities that tribal libraries face in advancing their community's needs. For those of you who missed that panel, have no fear. You can find a recording of it on YouTube under the title Indigenous Perspectives on Library and Museum Information Sciences. Again, that's Indigenous Perspectives on Library and Information Sciences. So today, I'm joined by an equally impressive slate of panelists. And like many others gathered here today, I look forward to learning more from them regarding their unique perspectives and experiences of engaging local communities through their work. And so in my presentation, I'm going to focus on my experiences of engaging local communities throughout my career, while offering some introductory remarks to start our panel today. So before I dive into the presentation, I just want to provide a short ho'olauna or introduction. The language that I used in my opening remarks, which is the same language you see on this slide, is Olelo Hawaii, otherwise known as the Hawaiian language. I am Native Hawaiian through my maternal lineages and was born and raised on the island of Hawaii, which is pictured here. And my genealogy connects me to the districts of Hilo, Puna, Ka'u, Kona, and Kohala. I was raised in the Hawaiian homeland community of Keaukaha, which is identified here with that gold star, and also raised in the rainforest community of Volcano Village in a land area known as Ola'a. This is near Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And I currently live in the town of Hilo. So the practice of engaging with local community is something that my educational background and aspirations continue to prepare me for. Just a glimpse of my educational background kind of helps to elucidate on that. So prior to my career as a student in higher education, I had the privilege of being educated in my community, the Kilkaha community's Hawaiian language and culture-based education system. And in this particular public schooling system, the students were really taught to be proud of their Hawaiian heritage, but also encouraged to be the next generation of community leaders. I very much vividly remember being asked as a student, when you come of age, what are you going to do on behalf of your community that has done so much for you? And so following these questions and experiences led me to the University of Hawaii at Hilo to study anthropology and Hawaiian studies, which gave me time and resources to further develop my own passion in Hawaiian history, language, and culture, with a particular emphasis on learning more about my community's history. And so during my time there, I had the opportunity to participate in numerous internships that exposed me particularly to the worlds of museums and cultural resource management. One of those internships in particular, it was called the Wahiku Puna Internship Program. It was managed by a nonprofit called Hulia Wapa'a, and it modeled for me what it looks like to engage with local community through the practice of archaeology. So in that particular internship program, they partner with Kamehameha schools to have student internships on their land base, but the internship is designed in consultation with community so that whatever is being produced to serve those communities' interests. Following undergrad, I started my graduate student career at the University of Denver and studied anthropology with an emphasis on museum and heritage studies. And I later entered a PhD program in American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa that allowed me to continue building on my education and as well as building up a local network of museum professionals and scholars. And just a few weeks ago, actually, I defended my dissertation titled Ku'uhomeo Kilkaha, Elei Mo'olalo no Ka'aina Aloha, My Home Kilkaha, A Lay of Stories for Beloved Lands. And this project brought together publicly available archival materials in order to shed light on the pre-homesteading and early developmental history of the Hawaiian homeland community of Kilkaha. And so rather than keep these primary sources to myself, I have spent the last few years sharing my research with community members who are equally interested in learning more about our community's past. And additionally, as a way to bring these archival materials to life, I conduct an array of huaka'ihele, otherwise known as sightseeing tours, where we walk along the shoreline and talk about the history of the area. All of this is just to say that engaging with local community through materials found in libraries, museums, and archives is something that I strive to do throughout my career. This is just an example of one of the earlier projects that I've worked on that really emphasizes this. This is something that I did as a junior in undergraduate school at UH Hilo. The event was titled Naki Ikupuna, Kilkaha's Past for Kilkaha's Future. And I partnered with a local group called Independent Leaders of Aloha United to pull off this one-day event that took place by the beach in a place that's known as Hawaiian Village, to invite community elders to bring some photographs from their personal collections to start a digital archive for the community. And so as part of this particular event, what we did was invite our friends from the Lyman Museum, which is a small natural and cultural history museum here in the town of Hilo. And we asked them to bring some of their photographs from their archives to share back with community, since this would be an opportunity for them not only to collect information on the photographs in their collections, but to also meet some of the community elders that were sharing some of their photographs for the start of this community archive. So in the upper left corner is an image of that Naki Ikupuna event with elders looking around a binder with photographs from the Lyman Museum, the staff member there in the sleeveless aloha shirt, the blue shirt with the glasses. Her name is Len Elia, collection manager and registrar at the Lyman Museum. And so, I love sharing more about this particular event because it was an opportunity for a local museum to realize the power and potential of community engagement. In this instance, they brought photographs from a recent photographic collection that they acquired, most of those photos taken in the 50s and 60s, an example of which is pictured in the center. These are people from the Kilkaha community doing a performance, probably for tourists who are coming from the local cruise ship that was docked. And so one of the things that happened during this event was as they were showing these photographs to the kupuna, they were able to name all of the people within the photographs, but they also let the Lyman Museum know that pictures like this were actually taken at the site that we were meeting at. Although you can't see it in the picture to the left, since we're all under tents, there was actually this pavilion in the same location where these events was held for the community. So this was just an opportunity that allowed the Lyman Museum to realize the importance of outreach and going outside of the walls of their institution in order to serve their community and to bring in different audiences to their institution. So now I want to just touch briefly on some of the projects that I've been working on recently, just to give you a broader sense of how, of the different ways that I'm engaging in community through my own work as a curator at the National Museum of the American Indian. The first event that I would like to talk about is this event titled The Art of Critical Pedagogy and Difficult Knowledge, Kui Kamana. This was an event that took place on April 27th of this year. And it was an opportunity for me to present at an educator's workshop at the Honolulu Museum of Art. And this workshop, which hosted about 35 participants, was primarily organized by Dr. Karen Kosasa, who is the Director Emeritus of the Museum Studies Certificate Program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And she put this program together in partnership with the education staff at the Honolulu Museum of Art. The purpose of the workshop was to expose educators to critical concepts like critical pedagogy, difficult knowledge. We also talked about museum decolonization and museum indigenization as concepts for people to keep in the back of their minds as they hear these things in the public realm. But it was centered around an art installation at the Honolulu Museum of Art titled Au'a. And so Au'a is an installation by the Native Hawaiian visual artist Kapulani Landgraf, and it consists of a series of photographic portraits, 108 in total, featuring various Native Hawaiian community leaders. And across their face, as an example here in the middle, you see a portrait of Honani K. Trask, a very well-known Native Hawaiian activist and as founding dean of the School of Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Across their faces, you see the phrase, "I am not an American," which is derived from one of Honani K. Trask's speeches in 1993 during the centennial anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And coupled with that phrase is the phrase, "He Hawaii au maua mau," translated as, "I am Hawaiian forever and ever." And so given the political nature of this work, we saw this as an opportunity to have further conversations around the importance of this kind of representation within the museum space, but also to hopefully provide educators with tools to think about how they might teach these subjects within their classes. And so as part of that day's work, what we did was I offered a short presentation on museum decolonization and indigenization, museum decolonization. Dr. Kosasa talked about critical pedagogy as an approach to think about engaging with works like this. And then Noelle Kahanu, who you can actually see her backside here in the very colorful dress to the right. She's an associate specialist in public humanities and Native Hawaiian programs at Manoa. She really emphasized the shift towards museum indigenization, i.e. when Indigenous curators and artists, community members are given more autonomy in these spaces to make choices on how things are presented, curated, how to create public programs like this. in order to engage more of the community with the issues that are being addressed. So those lectures were paired with a gallery tour, as seen on the right, as well as an art making activity. We were making collages here out of magazine articles, but the collages were speaking to critical issues within Hawaii. And in particular, many of them emphasized issues of houselessness as well as being priced out of paradise. As many of you know, Hawaii's realty is quite expensive and it continues to rise, which is forcing many local families to leave. So this activity was a way to get people to think about, again, ways to teach students about the critical things happening around us on an everyday basis. So the second example that I'd like to share is this is a project I've been working on for the past year in my role at NMAI. And we're in the process of returning this boulder that you see here that is named Kanepo. Kanepo is from the island of Hawaii, where I'm from, and was chosen in 2004 to serve as the Western cardinal marker of our museum. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C. and to NMAI, you'll notice that we have these 4 stones, one in the north, one in the south, one in the east, one in the west, to represent the hemispheric scope of our museum. And the Hawaii stone is quite special because unlike the other stones, Kanepo was not gifted to the museum, but rather loaned on a 20-year basis by members of the Kupuna Consultation Group of the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And the reasoning for a loan was because the consultation group recognized that at some point Kanepo needed to come home, that it wouldn't be appropriate to just leave Kanepo in DC permanently, but rather in recognition of being asked to send a rock, but also to ensure that that representation of Native Hawaiians are at NMAI because we are included in the founding legislation, that sending Kanepo was important, but also returning Kanepo was part of that project. So 20 years later, I'm tasked with facilitating this return, which has required me to work closely with the local community here on the island of Hawaii and the Kupuna Consultation Group to determine how best to proceed with this return. Over the past few months, I've been attending their monthly meetings, talking to them about how we can best clean Kanepo and prepare him for the journey home, meeting with them to determine proper protocols and who would be facilitating those aspects of the return. And so it's just an example of the ways in which community engagement sometimes can take quite a long time in order to design something that the community wants, while also talking to our institutions to ensure that they understand the importance of what is being asked of us. So I see that my time is coming to an end, but I wanted to end with this Olalono Eau. This is a Hawaiian wise saying called Makahana Ka'ike. And it translates to "in working, one learns." And I thought this would be a great way to segue into our next presentations, because as you'll see in these other presentations, you'll see professionals practicing what they preach when it comes to engaging with local communities. It is definitely not something that you just do once and you're an expert, but really something that you learn how to do through trial and error to see what works with community, what doesn't. With the ultimate goal of doing our best to serve as many members of our community as possible. So thank you all, and I look forward to hearing the next presentations. Mahalo.
Thank you, Helena. It's such an amazing presentation, and all the work that you're doing is wonderful. So thank you for sharing that information with us. I would like to introduce you all to Erlinda Nupui. And she is the president of the Pacific Islands Association of Libraries, Archives, and Museums. And she's also the director of the Jostens Q Public Library. Hello, and I understand it's 3 a.m. or...
It is 3:25 a.m. here at home, yes.
Well, good morning.
Good morning and hafa day, everyone. Let me just share my slide. Share screen. Sorry about that. Do you guys see my screen? Is that?
You're good.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, Hafaday, Tito, and welcome. On behalf of the Jolton Kizu Public Library, the NMI State Library, and the Piola, Pacific Island Association of Library Archives and Museum, I humbly thank the San Jose State University School of Information, Professor and Director Dr. Anthony Chow, Associate Professor Dr. Tanya San Nicolas Roca, and colleagues for the opportunity to be a part of today's speaker session as we celebrate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Erlinda Cabrera Naputi, and I'm the Library Director of the Jolton Kizu Public Library, the NMI State Librarian, and the President of Pacific Island Association of Library Archives and Museums. I've been working at the JKPL for 32 years now, and I began my career as a part-time clerk typist and worked my way up to my current position. As an Indigenous Chamorro who was born and raised in Saipan, I am honored to be overseeing the JKPL and 4 of its branches. Growing up, we did not have a public library. The closest to a library are the school libraries, which were very limited in space, resources, and not available to the public. Being the leader of this institution is close to my heart because of the dedication and commitment that our community and 2 Indigenous businessmen invested for their beloved Indigenous people. This presentation will discuss the Jolton Kizu Public Library, or I will refer to as JKPL, the roles of libraries, museums, and archives in engaging with local communities, the importance of libraries in promoting indigenized programs and services for our community. I will highlight how JKPL creates inclusive spaces for our employees and community by indigenizing colonized programming and creating a future Indigenous employment framework for national implementation. The map you see here is a glance at our geographical location. The Northern Mariana Islands, officially the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, is a self-governing commonwealth in association with the United States. It is composed of 14 islands in the Western Pacific with a population of 47,329. The Commonwealth is a part of the Mariana Islands, a chain of volcanic mountain peaks and uplifted coral reefs. The Marianas chain also includes the politically separated island of Guam to the south. Saipan is the capital of the NMI and is roughly 46.5 square miles. Tinian and Rota are the 2 other inhabited islands. Saipan is approximately 3,300 miles southwest of Honolulu and 3,000 miles north of Sydney, Australia. The native people of the Northern Mariana Islands are Chamorro. About 1/4 of the total population are Chamorros. Approximately 1/3 of the people are Filipino, and there are smaller portions of Chinese, Koreans, and other Pacific Islanders from Micronesia, such as Chuk, Pohnpei, Yap, Koshrai, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands and Republic of Palau. There is a small minority of Carolinians, descendants of people who migrated from the Central Carolines during the 19th century. About 2/5 of the Northern Marianas population is native-born. Small numbers come from Guam, the United States, or nearby island states. Welcome to your library. A quote from Walt Disney says, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." Every dream, thought, or idea starts from somewhere. In Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands, 2 prominent Indigenous businessmen, Jose C. Tenorio Jolton and Manuel Seman Villagomez Kizu, shared a dream to one day have a public space for their beloved Indigenous people and all to share, to gain knowledge, and to prepare future leaders. The space is now called the Jolton Kizu Public Library. The JKPL opened its doors in December 1991. With the labor of love of these 2 Indigenous businessmen, the dream of having a public library became a reality for the Indigenous people of the Northern Mariana Islands. Our mission is to provide access to information, knowledge, and materials supporting educational, entrepreneurial, cultural, research, and recreational activities. JKPO oversees the technical aspects of its library operation for 4 of its branches, as seen here on the screen, in collaboration with respective mayors of both municipalities, leveraging our annual Sinamay government appropriation and federal funds. The framework for the Joteng Kizu Library is such that we incorporate Indigenous perspectives in facility planning, program services, and our strategic plan. In Chamorro, we have the word called Inafa Maulik, which means maintaining our harmonious relationship with one another. Itanu, the land, Itasi, the ocean, and Igotgasia, the animals, and working together to make things right. Through this value of mutual reciprocity rather than individualism, we, the Joteng Kizu Public Library, continue to respond as global citizens to user demands that very much reflect our public library programming and services. JKPO's workforce is predominantly Indigenous, with the Indigenous people of the Northern Mariana Islands comprising 99% of our staff. Our leadership recognized that the Indigenous knowledge held by our employees is not only valuable, but also essential to perpetuating Indigenous contents in our library. This understanding underscores our commitment to professional development, training, and continuing education, which we consider to be of paramount importance. The JKPO is very fortunate to have Indigenous people on staff who share the same passion and believe in serving our local Indigenous people the quality library service they deserve. What better way to promote and share our local library than with our Indigenous people? Investing in staff means the knowledge attained and experience gained remain in the institution. From July 1st to August 2022, I attended the Native of Hawaiian Pacific Islander Museum Institute, or NHPME, which was funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and co-organized by the University of Hawaii Museum Studies Graduate Certificate Program and the East-West Center. NHPME is designed to provide early to mid-career museum professionals with training and 3 vital areas of museum work: collections care, conservation, and exhibition. My goal in participating in this prestigious cohort is to learn about the training and opportunities and learn about caring for collection and conservation. Based on this experience, I was able to share what was learned during NHPME with my library team. In line with NHPME cohort training, the JKPO held its first disaster preparedness response training on June 21 and 22, 2023. We partnered with the University of Hawaii Center for Pacific Island Studies and UH Manoa Museum Studies Graduate Certificate Program to facilitate a 2-day free hands-on workshop on assisting museums, libraries, and community space in disaster preparedness and response. Since then, the JKPO has conducted the same training. This type of training helps the library provide professional development, promotes knowledge sharing, and training to Indigenous staff and community members. The NMI Museum of History and Culture is located in Garapan, Saipan. It holds exhibition about Chamorro and Carolinian people and displays artifacts, documents, textiles, and photographs from the Spanish, German, Japanese, and American periods in the Northern Marianas. Team JKPO learned valuable preservation and presentation skills from NMI Museum staff. Here, Team JKPO is pictured visiting the NMI Museum History and Culture and learning from docent Archie Ahoste about preserving traditional Spanish wear, cultural wear, such as the mestiza. This inspired the JKPO team to wear cultural attire for special cultural events. We visited the gallery and observed the Spanish collection in the NMI Museum, learning about our history and seeing actual artifacts from the NMI Museum provided. The actual artifacts from the NMI Museum provided our team with rich cultural experience. I'm sorry about that. American Memorial Park honors the American and Marianas people who gave their lives during the Marianas campaign of World War II. At the park, memorial stands in tribute to the courage and sacrifice of the U.S. servicemen and Chamorro and Carolinian civilians who were killed in the battles between the United States and Japan that took place on Saipan, Tinian, and the Philippine Sea in 1944. By visiting the NMI Museum and the American Memorial Park with our staff beforehand, Team JKPO was able to create and incorporate lesson plans into our summer reading program. The 31st Annual Piola Conference was held in Saipan in December 2022. Participants visited the American Memorial Park Visitor Center and learned about American colonization after the Battle of Saipan. Our indigenous team, who knows about our history and culture, was an important asset in educating our visitors about the importance and historical events that took place in our island. As part of our indigenous training, we visited the Senator Antonio M. Palomo Museum in Guam. It is the Chamorro Educational Facility. It is located in Hagåtña, Guam. The 6,200 square foot gallery located on the second floor of Guam Museum is the first of its kind on the island. It features interactive state-of-the-art technology and most complete displays of Guam's history and culture in the Chamorro language today. We also visited the Guam Museum, increasing our knowledge of cultural artifacts and history. Hinanauta Nui Mananauta Tanu Itzamoru Siha, the journey of the Chamorro people. We wrapped up our training at the Guam Cultural Repository at the University of Guam, a joint program of the University of Guam and the Department of Chamorro Affairs of the Guam Museum, under the Office of the Governor. We also had the privilege of participating in enriching workshops on enhancing research literacy skills and introduction to special collections. We then visited the University of Guam Micronesian Area Research Center, or MARC, home of the most extensive repository of information about Guam and Micronesia. During our culture tour in Guam, we visited the outdoor Umatak Library and the Academic Library, as well as the University of Guam's Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Library. The product of our indigenous training came into action when our Pacific Rim supervisor gave a tour of the lattice sites and research to some of our Piola members during the 31st Piola Annual Conference. Here is a photo of our cultural tour at the Kakman Katan Lati site, one of the sites in Saipan. We hosted a variety of hands-on training sessions for our fellow librarians on book mending, book binding, and cataloging of local books and the summer reading program development for National Library Week. We utilized JKPO's front circulation team to provide institutional and cultural knowledge of books, the environment, and our people for this training. The JKPO's Bookmobile is a mini library on wheels that makes weekly visits to various remote communities throughout Saipan to provide valuable and free public library services and information technology. The JKPO utilizes the Technology Mobile Express and the Bookmobile outreach services to reach the most underserved and underprivileged indigenous community throughout Saipan. The photo was taken at the Gumahigai, or the Chamorro Boathouse, where our Manamku, our elders, would build canoes. We made sure that the participants of our summer reading program learn about celestial navigation and canoe building from master navigators and cultural practitioners. JKPL hosted cultural classes featuring visual artists, master artisans, local Chamorro historians, experimental archaeologists, and public lecturers. Participants learned about the importance of our outrigger canoes in ancient Chamorro times. Teens and adults learn importance of ancient Chamorro craftsmanship and gain knowledge on artifact replication, such as traditional and contemporary jewelry making, body ornaments, miniature wood carving, just to name a few. Our Bookmobile also conducts cultural art at my library with Chamorro artist Linda Torres, who utilized books from our Pacific collection featuring ancient Chamorro petroglyphs and pictographs from our community members to paint. The benefit of our TME, or Technology Mobile Express, to our patrons is they won't need transportation to receive free Wi-Fi access, and they won't be required to subscribe to unlimited data or home internet. Patrons without Wi-Fi capable device can utilize the TME's public workstation. The TME will be ready to assist during a state of disaster. The purpose of JKPO's Pacific Rim area is to assist, guide, and service patrons of the community in accessing and utilizing the library, its books, computers, and other Pacific information resources for their benefit. The Pacific Collection includes specialized section for reference documents and reading materials on indigenous peoples of the Marianas and Micronesia area. It has 2,000 titles of over 2,000 titles of books and over 300 artworks, paintings, and indigenous posters depicting local languages, hierarchy, descriptions of the ancient Chamorro society. We have special projects in the Pacific Collection as part of our commitment to community engagement. And such projects involves sending surveys and questionnaires about our rich local history and culture. We value the input and these surveys are a great way for our community to contribute. The responses are then shared in JKPO's Facebook and Instagram, fostering community and shared knowledge. We always ensure that we proactively invite and welcome all our community members to visit our library gem, the Pacific Collection. Here is a picture. Here is the Pacific Room Collection inventory at a glance. The Pacific Collection displays ephemera received from our offsite visits, donations, or collection acquisitions are prominently highlighted in the Pacific Room for our community to enjoy. We feature some of our Pacific Collection exhibits and displays for our community for our Chamorro and Carolinian Cultural Heritage Month celebrated in September. We also feature our Pacific Collection displays of our Chamorro Sinahi and some of our new local books. Sharing some of the responses from our local community for our social media campaign, which highlights our Pacific Collection. A community member shared, "It is important that we teach our children our language and culture. If we lose that, it will be harder for the next generation to understand and speak the language. Teaching the next generation how to speak Chamorro and Carolinian languages keeps our culture alive and strong." As part of JKPO's summer reading program, children had fun learning the basics of using the talaza or net drawing with hands-on instruction sponsored by the JKPO and the Friends of the JKPO. Classes were taught by indigenous Chamorro talazeros. They shared inspiring stories about why they had to learn to catch fish using the talaza to help their families bring food to the table. One of the participants shared how she loved the Joteng Kizu Public Library and she had so much fun learning about the talazero skills. At the heart of the JKPO is a collaborative spirit that ensures we continue to promote and include our stakeholders. We work hand in hand with local book authors, publishers, and our community, hosting and unveiling locally written and locally published books. The Lady Diane Torres Foundation, in partnership with the school-aged children, publishes books written in Chamorro and Carolinian languages, a testament to our shared commitment to preserving our cultural heritage. Children's Book Author of the Year, Jude Littlumar, shared a sentiment that resonates with us, many of us. "I am deeply grateful to the Northern Marana Island Center for the Book, Joteng Kizu Public Library, for considering my book at this year's official Children's Youth Book Selection. It was a profound moment to see something I created in my youth still holding relevancy. This recognition validates my work and underscores the importance of our local authors and the impact of the JKPO on our community's literary landscape." During the pandemic, we recorded a variety of Chamorro storytelling and uploaded to our YouTube channel so that our patrons could continue to use our Chamorro reading program. During the summer, the JKPO incorporates cultural aspects into its summer reading program. The lesson plan includes a visit to the NMI Museum, Gumahiga, 500 cells, where students learn about the ancient ways of living in the indigenous people of the Maranas. The JKPO launched the Pacific Culture Corner in 2020, a virtual cultural literacy program designed to encourage children and adults to continue speaking and reading in their native language. Along with the indigenous bilingual educators, Sinamay cultural agencies, and cultural practitioners, the Pacific Cultural Corners helps promote cultural literacy throughout the CNMI. The JKPO leadership maintains the inclusion of indigenous concepts in our programs and services. As NMI's information hub, preserving our indigenous culture heritage and connecting people, libraries, and government to the resources and tools they need to succeed and to build a stronger community. The Joteng Kizu Public Library continues to enrich and inspire our diverse community. We understand that we have an added layer of responsibility with significant challenges to embrace our global way of being and build a sustainable, values-based community. By practicing the Chamorro value of Inafamolik, we maintain and sustain order and harmonious relationship with our community partners, stakeholders, and the global community. Now, I would like to share 2 videos demonstrating some of our cultural programs. So I'm actually featuring one of our traditional Chamorro dance. It's Nyora, meaning a way to respect to the elders, where we hold their hand and kiss it, and demonstration of our respect to our elderlies. So this is one of the cultural dance that we performed in Piola that was held in Palau last year. And we were led by one of our traditional dancers, Chamorro dancers, Jonas Barcinas, and the team at the back that are all in uniform costume is the staff of the Joteng Kizu Public Library. So it's just demonstrating a way of how we perform. We share our culture with very different people or different families in Micronesia. And we don't need to watch the entire script because it's about 4 minutes, but I wanted to share that with you guys, just the way we incorporate indigenous concept into our programming. As we address and meet the challenges of the CNMI, our commitment to public service and our community partners, patrons, and the CNMI will continue to guide us. We thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services, our Office of the Governor, our Governor Arnold I. Palacios, and Lieutenant Governor David M. Apatang, the Commonwealth Library Council, Friends of the JKPL, Team JKPL, and the numerous donors, sponsors, both private and public, our community partners, our volunteers, and most especially the community for your patronage and support. As Helen Keller once said, alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much.
That's an excellent.
And our contact information is on the screen if you guys have any more questions. If you like to visit our website, we have a Twitter account. Believe it or not, we also have a TikTok account that's run by our student volunteers, and our YouTube channel. Sizu Usmasi, Olomoy, thank you. And Biba, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Thank you so much, Erlinda. I appreciate your presentation and all the amazing things that you all are doing there in Saipan and Guam and other areas of the Micronesian islands, the Mariana Islands. I want to go back to Guam now and even visit Saipan.
You should come and visit our beautiful Marianas. It's a hidden gem in the Pacific. So
Yes.
sorry about me. I may have gone over my time, but again, thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Ricky Punzalan. He's the Associate Professor at the University of Michigan, and he's focusing on reparative approaches to Philippine collections at the University of Michigan. Thank you so much, Ricky, for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be invited and to present and to celebrate the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Today, I'll talk about the reparative approaches to colonial collections project that we are working on here at the University of Michigan. So, one of the goals that I'd like to talk about this afternoon here and morning for some is that, this notion of repair and why we need reparative actions. So, we repair things when we see that there's damage or something is broken. But also repair could also mean a kind of, maintenance, like for the existing ones to, ensure that they continue to work. And when it comes to relationships, we repair damaged relationships, and we also create ones that do not exist. And so the whole idea for us doing this work is centering around the idea of building relationships and repairing harmful fixing reworking some of the practices that have harmed communities towards creating more relationships. So I'll give you this quote that's so far has been inspiring my work. This is from the book Decolonial Archival Futures that says archivists, the archives profession, and archival organizations have work to do. Decentering colonial archival practices will require a lot of active engagement, difficult conversations, meaningful partnerships, and change. The profession must prioritize relationship building. The archives profession still needs to do and reimagine how archival practice, research, and community engagement can exist in decolonial frameworks. Archives and archival practice can have imagined futures beyond uses for the colonial state. They can exist beyond the structures created through the legacies of white supremacy and become part of the colonial power. Likewise, archives can be part of future of indigenous communities who are reclaiming and preserving their stories for future generations. The reason why I highlight this quote and I say that it's inspiring the work that we're doing is because it's centered and focused around relationship building and oriented towards bringing collections to communities. Because as a university for many decades, the Philippine collections here have been oriented towards academic and scholarly and research use, but people working in archives, libraries, and museums fields right now understand that more recent and contemporary perspectives around uses and impacts of collections need not be limited to academic use, but also for towards community impacts. Because of this, we have this. We embarked on a project called Reconnect, Recollect, Reparative Connections to Philippine Collections at the University of Michigan. Now, why should we care about the collections, especially if you are Filipino, that's found in Michigan? First is that, I would say that there's been many years of sustained collecting done by academics, professors, and students and alumni from this university. For instance, since the 1880s, even before we became a colony of the United States, American, Michigan-based academics went to the Philippines to collect natural history specimens, so birds, mammals, flora and fauna. And the picture I'm showing now is one of those expedition. Would you believe that showing you these photos, these are actually academics, but yet they're holding guns. They're like I call them bandits. They're like bandits, there to get stuff and brought them back to Michigan. So because of this, the university has become one of the big repositories of Philippine materials in North America. Here's an visualization to just give you an idea of the lay of the land when it comes to Philippine collection at this university. So they're scattered across 8 institutions, all under the university. There's a lot of ethnographic objects, archival materials, so forth and so on. And the reason why these things exist is because of the long-standing colonial relationship between Michigan faculty, students, and alumni, and the Philippines as a site of research and study. So, the Reconnect project had 3 goals in mind. We said, how do we conduct reparative scholarship that repairs relationships and will also build those relationships if they don't exist? what is a way for us to create a reparative connection between collections, institutions, and communities? And then finally, what's reparative curation? Curation that centers, relationship building in, the way we represent and discuss materials that we have in this university. So, on reparative scholarship, just a little bit of, emerging or existing ideas in the literature that I'd like to share, and also is an inspiration for, I think, all of us. Is one of those is Takin Yang's "Our Words Refusing Research," where the most relevant bullet here of the three things that they mentioned in this article is that research may not be the intervention that is needed. Sometimes, as scholars in universities, as people in charge of collections in universities, we think that the primary purpose or reason why things exist is because, they will be used for academic purpose. But sometimes this is not what is needed. Sometimes when we go to communities, it's not just to study them or to generate, this kind of extractive relationship, but also to give back to communities. And the other, ideas that we're working on right now is, the notion of a slow archives. Like opening up the possibility of seeing the intricate web of relationships formed and forged through like the attention to more collaborative curation processes that do not default in the normative structures of attribution, access, or scale. Being slow, meaning you invest more on relationships, assessment of your positionality, and a framework that will privilege restorative and reparative work that should be decolonial in its logic and practice. So how do we do that? So for instance, one is to go where the community is at. So with the Philippine collection at the university, it's very interesting because there's, on one hand, there are Filipinos in the Philippines, but Filipinos are also here in North America. In fact, there are so many Filipinos here in Ann Arbor and in the state of Michigan. So, bringing the collection to Filipinos, at least, we told the university should not be that difficult because we are already here. I'm a professor of this university and I'm here and I'm Filipino, for instance. So one of the projects we did is we brought Filipino and Filipino-American artists in 2022 to interact with the collection, and not to obligate them to create art, but to see, the collection and interact with the materials that we have, and have a dialogue on the potential uses and value of the collection for art making. That's not necessarily writing articles or publishing a book, but to see how these colonial collections could also inspire a kind of counter curation from artists as they experience and see the extent of the materials we have in our collections at the university. We went to the Philippine Independence Celebration organized by the Filipino American Community Council of Michigan in June 12, 2022. And showcase some of the materials that we have in the university. The reason is that there's so many people living in Ann Arbor and in the state of Michigan, and some of them are alumni of the university and they're Filipino and not aware that there are Philippine materials here at the university. And this is, the reason why we needed to show up and showcase the materials, and that people are welcome to use the items that are here. We also opened up, events for FASA, the Filipino American Students Association, so that they see the materials that they have. At first, we were worried that maybe the students will not be interested in the items in the collection, but we were proven wrong. They wanted to do this year after year after year so that they get to see the items in the collection. So we also had events where we invited artists and culture bearers. For instance, looking at the martial arts, and also a collection of weaponry at the university, and kind of activate these material objects so that they see how they're used and their purpose in for the community. So we brought cultural bearers from the Cordillera in northern Luzon for a residency, and interact with the items. And we brought a tattoo artist to look at the tattoo patterns in the pictures that we have in the collection. We have a textile weaver and a basket weaver, so that they could see, just to emphasize that there are actually tangible uses for these historical collections for communities back in the Philippines, that they could use them in their livelihood, and also engage in a conversation on why these materials are here and the value of sharing them back to communities. And we did not stop there. We went back to the Philippines, where the cultural bearers came from, and started distributing copies of those archival and museum items back to the community. So here's one, transfer to the Northern Luzon Archives at University of Philippines Baguio, which is, the main one of the main academic hubs in the region, so that communities need not request copies of materials about their cultural heritage in Michigan, but they can do it in a local university. But we did not stop there. We went to specific community centers like the Onjon ni Ibadoy, the Ibaloy Heritage House in Baguio, to return copies of materials of their ancestors, and say that there's more at the university if you would like to get copies, and then you can use them for your purpose in your center. During this event, 5 clan members from this community came and celebrated getting these copies of these images. The value of this is that we say that images of our ancestors do not only belong in museum walls, they also belong in our living room, in our homes, because these are family members. Why? How come when we encounter these images, most of the time we encounter them in museum walls? So, we gave them away to whoever would like a copy, not just museums and libraries and archives, but just people. So we also gave copies to an elementary school, because they have a school museum, and kids would like to see these traditional objects. And then, a museum in Bontoc also. And then another, school, the university, the Mountain Province State Polytechnic College, and also the Ifugao State University Rice Museum, and the National Museum branch in Kiangan, which is also part of, in Kiangan, Ifugao. And then finally, we went to Nueva Vizcaya State University Museum. So the idea is that we gave multiple copies to multiple institutions and made them available to anyone who would like to have a claim on having copies of these materials, because we do think that sharing and being present in the community is the best way to activate the collection and make them more relevant to communities. So we also here locally, we needed to do an inventory of the materials we have, because it's very hard for discovery if you don't have a comprehensive listing of the items that we have. And that's an ongoing project that we are doing. We are also working on reparative description, which is, fixing the language in our finding aid and in our catalog that are, exclusionary, silencing people, or harming or mischaracterize people. So, for instance, here's one example of a finding aid that's basically saying, Wooster began to think of the exciting prospect of Philippines as an American colony. Like this kind of perspective that's celebratory of colonialism, calling the Philippine-American War an insurgency, for instance, instead of calling it a war. Like we're revisiting our finding aid and making recommendations for these things to be changed because like the orientation is to sometimes celebrate colonialism when we should be more critical of the roles of these American academics in the Philippines. So we created a toolkit. It's useful, hopefully, for other institutions if they would like to emulate the work that we've done in the Philippines. Let me see if I could click on this and then share. Can people see the website?
Not yet. We still see the slide.
Okay, I will share the website, this one. So this is just, my last point to walk you through some of the items here in our toolkit. So this is the site, a lot of pictures. There's a video. I highly encourage you to watch this video of the 3 cultural bearers who came and used the collection. The different interventions that we did, the inventory, the glossary of harmful terminologies that we've created, that we see being used when describing Philippine materials. Some of the, trips that we did in the Philippines and our bibliography. Here's, the toolkit that I think is going to be useful for a lot of us here. Where you can say, see how we've done things, the recommendations, the lessons that we learned, in doing this, like the different collaborations that we had. So please go visit our site, play around, watch the video, and see how we've done the work here at Michigan, and hopefully it's going to be as inspiring for all of you. So thank you so much, and I'll end there.
Thank you, Ricky, and thank you so much for sharing the website and for all the amazing things that you are doing there. Our next speaker is Dr. Ray Poon. He is the academic and research librarian at Boulder Graduate School of Education, and he was also newly elected as ALA president for 2025-2026. So, Ray, I'm going to pass it on over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Tanya San Nicolas Roca. That was really great just hearing from all the speakers and giving really great perspective on the work they're doing and what is needed to be heard. And so in terms of the work we're doing when it comes to this kind of engagement, relationship building, it's all really, really important. And so I'm really honored to be invited and to be part of this symposium with this distinguished panel and focusing on this theme, the role of libraries, museums, archives, and engaging with local communities. And so while the speakers are presenting from islands in the Pacific and from their experiences and how they're engaging with their respective communities, I wanted to share that I am not Pacific Islander. I am a second generation Chinese American, and have some considerations that I wanted to share in terms of what I've been seeing when it comes to AANHPI Heritage Month, which is this month. And so I'm going to just share my slides and look forward to hearing some of your thoughts and some considerations on this topic, which is thinking about data and critically how to analyze and examine them to dismantle erasure because it's happening in different ways. And so this talk is actually a little bit different from the ones you heard earlier, which is that my presentation really centers on a skill that all of us should be considering and how do we think about this issue when we hear AANHPI data and so forth. So as shared earlier, I am the academic and research librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education. My pronouns are he and him, and I am a librarian in this position, but as well as a teacher educator, where I teach classes, seminars to some of our graduate students becoming teachers, as well as our master's pathway program, where you see a photo here for the graduating class from last year, where I had an honor to really teach them throughout the year and engage with them and their research process and projects. And so one of the assignments that many of our students have to work on, and so as part of their training and thinking about their role as future teachers at Alder, which is based in California, they have to think about a community mapping project or in some ways gathering data or information and so forth. And so this gets into an interesting conversation, which we're going to get at. And it gets into this idea of like how we gathered information, synthesize such information, and make sense of it. And that's predominantly our role in the information and library field. But then we might end up seeing an aggregation of information that might not reflect the differences that need to be more apparent. So the question really is, what does it mean to create a monolithic narrative that erases perpetually? So monolithic narrative meaning that it's one that is just grouping everybody together in terms of same experiences. And this is like how we all are. This is, there's no differences rather, right? And it creates that perpetually and it erases experiences. So let's look at some examples when it's what's happening right now, since it's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You might be seeing it in your local bookstores if you're going around in your neighborhood or maybe in your local libraries. And so you might see some book displays from something similar to this, right? And then these are just images I pulled from the internet and I'll show an example that I did see something that came up in my local bookstore. And so what happens is that you see a sign here, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, but then you end up, if you look closely, you end up seeing the lack of representation of specific groups within the APA umbrella, right? And so what ends up happening is that we might end up seeing more experiences from Chinese, Japanese, or Korean cultures, food, right? So this aesthetic that you see, that's very East Asian oriented. But what about Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, right? This sort of complete erasure, whether it was intentional or not, or this lack of awareness, right? That we are not the same. So this is what's happening right now when we're celebrating AANHPI and you see these book displays or some sort of exhibit, and then something is sort of missing or not uplifted in a way it should be. And so I wanted to share last year, I went to this local bookstore and then I saw this display, Celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And then there was a book called Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden, which was really interesting because it has nothing to do with Asian American or Pacific Islander experiences. This is an American novelist, right, who did some research about geishas and wrote something about it. And a film came out, years later. And so it was particularly interesting to me, like, why is this title here? And you can see the next one, Amy Tan. And so it's in some ways for me it was quite jarring to see this in California. And then I asked the bookstore person, I'm like, hey, I don't know if this is the appropriate item that should be in this display. And then so they didn't realize, like, they were like, oh, I'm sorry. And I said, oh no, I just wanted to flag this. And so I think what we end up seeing is this aggregation, right? That's happening in book displays, that's happening in these exhibits and how people group us together. And then that also means it happens in data. It means that it happens in the information we're collecting too. That's being provided by XYZ agency. And so I think it gives us a moment here to reflect what that means. And so I work with teachers. I teach graduate students striving to be teachers. And we do a lot of skill building exercises, whether that's reading, writing, how to read a scholarly article, how to analyze data. And it reminds me a lot about this quote from Dr. Safiya Noble from UCLA, who writes that we have more data and technology than ever, and we have more economic and social injustice to go with it. And so, to Dr. Noble's point, I think what we're seeing is there's so much information online, right? There's so much of this data set that's being available, and what does that mean for us to make sense of it? How do we, maybe to Ricky's point, like think about reparative curation, right? Like ensuring that some of the sets are actually reflective of such experiences. And so, one of the exercises that we had to do at my institution is that every graduate student has to write a positionality statement, which is like who they are, how they see themselves in the classroom as teachers based on their identities. And so a lot of the students generally struggle because it's intense to like reflect in a way that's critical, knowing that your classroom might be similar or very different. And so we use this graphic from Sylvia Duckworth, you may have seen on social media. It's a diagram labeled Wheel of Power and Privilege, showing the different degrees to which a person can be marginalized or have power over others in society based on their characteristics. And what happens is that this is mostly in the Northern American perspective, that there is a circle here that says power, and these are sort of the qualifiers or characteristics that would be gravitating towards having privilege or power. And then the outer circle says marginalized, right? And then you have all these other features, right? Qualifiers. And then when we show this graphic, and it's not perfect by all means, there's definitely some errors here in terms of it's missing some things, it's not equalizing necessarily, right? But what it gets them thinking is that how do they identify the intersectional identities that they have, that they hold? And what does it mean to reflect on the data that they're gathering, right? Is the data intersectional? Is the information that they're interpreting giving that lens that they bring in? So this is part of an exercise that helps them think about their statements, and it helps us understand some of the upcoming important stuff that's happening in terms of what data is being collected. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of these data sets out there. So according to the Pew Research Institute in the United States, there are changing categories in the US Census, as you can see here, that's been used to measure race from 1790 to 2020, right? And so here's an example of how it's shifted in official accounts. So historically, Asians and Pacific Islanders were grouped together by the government classification, and in large part by grassroots groups, grassroots organizations, because there was an intentional community effort to build solidarity. And then in the 1980s, it sort of shifted, right? You can start seeing the dates here where things are in the 2000s, like where there are more representation that's clear. The 1980s, the US Census decided to group Pacific Islanders under the same categorization. Now, the idea is that both groups were relatively small, that they could potentially create more advocacy and support. And then, of course, in 2000, it clearly defined Asian Americans as having origins of Southeast Asia, or this Indian subcontinent, and then Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islanders, right, into another category. So it's sort of disentangled there. The census is problematic, right, in general, like how it collects information, how it groups based on its intention. And because of that grouping, it creates this imagination in people's mind, potentially, to not realize that there are a lot of stark differences and lived experiences. All of us here, we certainly know that, but it helps us to look back at what are these lived experiences that is so really different. So let's look at some of the anti-Asian and Pacific Islander racism. A few historical examples. This is by all means not comprehensive, but let's look at from 1840s with Chinese laborers being exploited, to the Chinese Exclusion Act, to the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893, to Japanese American incarceration during World War II in 1940s, murder of Vincent Chin in Detroit in 1982, being mistaken for Japanese American, Vincent Chin, Chinese American, and this was in Detroit during the height of anxiety with the automobile industry. And then 2001, leading to post 9/11 violence towards South Asian Americans. And so we end up seeing these lived experiences that are very different, yet the classifications of the data sets tend to lump us together, right? Still, yet not acknowledging these differences. Now, I also want to mention for Pacific Islanders, the representation, as we saw in that book display, right? It's quite lacking and often erased from the AAPI discourse. But there's been growing conversations on these distinct identities and histories based on what I'm seeing and observing that perhaps Pacific Islanders might be closely identifying with indigenous groups, or sometimes it's under these other umbrellas, AAPI, AANHPI, or Pacifica. And so we look at some of the data here, breaking it down. It's really helpful to see like the census data from the American Community Survey. It breaks it down further. And then for Asians alone, and then there's another separate data set right here for Pacific Islanders. It's helpful for us to remind, especially the groups I serve, right, to remind them that there are differences that needs to be acknowledged, because when we don't acknowledge these differences and when we just use them as one lens, it can create unintended or intended harmful effect, right? How we serve certain groups, how we provide resources, how we think about our lesson plans and so forth. And so it's important that I wanted to mention that there is a huge problem with data aggregation. It seems really convenient to lump us all together as AAPI and then get all the data, but not acknowledging that there's going to be these different lived experiences and histories, right, that are happening, as I mentioned and outlined earlier. And so when we break it down, it helps the researchers, all of us here, policy members, community members, to really understand the different needs and groups. And so when we continue aggregating data, it really perpetuates that model minority myth that we all have the same monolithic narrative, right? That we all have XYZ experiences that are very similar, but yet overall we have different challenges that need to be mentioned. So let's talk about what are some groups that are doing this to disaggregate and raising awareness. So there's a group called AAPI Data, which is founded by many academics to really break down data that really helps us understand the different needs, even breaking it out further. Like, for example, poverty rates among Southeast Asian Americans, right? And then it breaks it down by different backgrounds. And so when we see this, it's important to note that Asian American Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing populations in the United States, and the communities represents really diverse needs. And so we need to sort of reject this collection, right? That there is a high sort of aggregation of AAPI and that there's huge diversity, right? And so we need to look into these sort of sources to really push out these important experiences that are not being noted. Here's another one from Pew Research Institute, right, talking about the microaggressions, the racism that Asian Americans experience. And here's one from PBS NewsHour, which came out last year on a segment related to police killings and violence towards Pacific Islanders. And then they broke it down, disaggregating AAPI risk of fatal police violence, PLOS 1. So I thought it was pretty important to see that, right? Still breaking it down further, but potentially giving us some idea of how we think about data that's being collected and how we understand the narratives within each of the data more clearly than just an umbrella AAPI term or just a simple like book display, right, that captures all these experiences. And so what are some sort of aspects that we're seeing? So based on that segment, this was an article from San Francisco Examiner that says the city is now launching a new community hub to serve Pacific Islander residents because of this issue, to bring in support and engagement. And so I think it's helpful for us when we see more data being specific and intentional and how it's being shared and used. And then in the federal government level, they have a statistical data set that's now looking at disaggregating Asian, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander communities. And so it helps us think about prioritizing this disaggregation effort and makes us have more better understanding of what resources are really needed. So I just wanted to share a few more points here that we need to acknowledge that how data is being collected, it's not objective nor neutral, and recognize that there's a long racist history of statistics that's connected to colonialism and imperialism, right? And then we need to understand that some of the data that's being gathered really needs that human context, putting the human back in. So considering community engaged methods, qualitative data, interviews, surveys, to really put that into perspective, if that's the method you're choosing. And of course, continuously thinking about how we disaggregate race and ethnicity data and making it all available, like what AAPIdata.com is doing. And so this came from the University of Minnesota. They have this incredible research guide on anti-racism when it comes to data access and how some groups will have more access to information about themselves, right, than other groups, which is unfortunate. And hopefully down the line that we will have more accurate information and data that's available for people to conduct research, to make decisions, to continuously advocate for funding and resources and so forth. And so AAPI Data has this really interesting dashboard that they're working on, which is looking at the community counts on census and how they're doing a detailed national state population for 40 Asian and Native Hawaiian origin groups. So it really breaks it down further, and you can explore more there. And so all of this really lands nicely to what I experienced last month, which is something I'm going to wrap up here and to share with all of you. I had an opportunity to attend the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Higher Education Leadership Summit that was held at UC California, Berkeley, supported by the Office of Personnel Management, as well as the White House Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Commission. And so in this session last month, there was a lot of lively discussions about higher education leadership, reflecting on how the population has changed. And that also means language and social identities have really changed since 2007. And there's been a lot of really good panel discussions, especially one focusing on the chancellor's experiences. And one chancellor shared about how he was identifying as Native Hawaiian, connected to Native Hawaiian pedagogy to include stories, purposes, and functions and knowledge to their learners, because COVID-19, the impact of it was affecting Native Hawaiian students disproportionately, right, with the lack of financial resources, childcare, and academic preparedness. So he was talking about how there are different ways to really engage and support. And that was really eye-opening to hear from his perspective how they were able to support that enrollment process. And then there were a panel of Native Hawaiian students sharing their experiences, being part of a student in this journey, and then really acknowledging that overall, the summit, that we have different experiences. Certainly we come together in solidarity and support with one another to raise awareness of some of these issues, but our experiences are not singular nor in a monolith. And so we need to acknowledge the diversity and the differences that we all bring and carry, so that this addresses, like I mentioned, policy, services, and all these other resources that need to be designated appropriately and equitably. So I wanted to share sort of a call to action. You know, we're not the same. We might share maybe similar aspects in some other ways, but in general, we recognize as a community, right? There's collective action. There's strength in numbers when all of us come together to advocate for specific areas, whether that's disaggregating some of the data sets that's happening, or even calling in some of these bookstores, right, that are not creating that diverse narrative of AA and HPI experiences during this month, and recognizing the erasure and harm that might come with it. And more importantly, realizing that you don't do it alone, and you find your community. You find people here in this space to come together and talk about these issues, how difficult they may be, but how important and necessary. So I wanted to give a shout out to some of the folks I attended this conference. So Sina, Annie, Nikki, Sharice, and Neil, we were all attending that summit, and it was so great because we're all members of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, but also just had a chance to like reflect and talk about what we heard and come together, and knowing that we can make the change when we're thinking about it and talking about it together out loud. So thank you so much for this invitation. I wanted to just share just some of my thoughts and observations, especially related to what we're thinking about and discussing, and how it impacts the work we're doing going forward.
Thank you, Ray. That was, I appreciate you bringing that topic up. I think a lot of people listening in would agree with that, and the importance of understanding, the differences, and of course, what brings us together. And I have to say that even just within the Chamorro culture, it's everybody is welcome. Everybody is welcome. And one of the ways that we welcome people is through food and to share our culture. And I think that's extremely important, not just with, AA and HPI, but just within all cultures, and to be able to share the similarities and what makes us so similar, and celebrate all those differences. So, but thank you so much for bringing up all that, that topic. I think it was very, very important. And thank you so much for all the speakers. Everything that you've shared, I think was great. And I love to see all the things that you're doing. And at this point, I would love to open it up and see if anybody has any questions for any of the speakers.
As we wait for any questions, I did have one that I came up with just to start our conversation. Thank you again, everybody, for your contributions. It was really great to hear about these amazing projects and case studies. And I look forward to continue learning more in the future. So my questions is more of a broader reflection of doing this work of engaging local community. And it's, just an open one to see what were some of the effective strategies for community engagement that you learned in pursuit of these various projects. Is there maybe one or two that stands out as something you learned in the process that worked for the communities that were involved?
I could start maybe because I'm coming from an academic unit that's very far removed from, the cultures of these collections. And for me, it's very important to be invited by the community. And how do you get invited? I always, get that question. Then if you wait, I said, no, you don't wait to be invited. You talk to people, working with the community and as many people as you can, and you say, we would like to come, we would like to visit. And then once you're invited, the community is actually very generous. As like with Filipinos, again, it's always around food. There's a lot of food, and people are happy when they give you a lot of food. And that and it's centered around food. There's also learning about the different protocols around sharing the materials, having a program, and things like that. Practice of generosity is very important, which is like really it's not unknown if you are operating within a community. But if you're in an academic unit, like here in Michigan, in the North, there are certain things that you realize that, is just like, oh, my institution is not equipped for this. Like, for instance, we are having a Filipino event and we have to provide Filipino food, but there's no Filipino establishment, restaurant. So what do? You ask people in the community to cook, and figuring out how the person who cooked could be paid when they're not a restaurant. This is someone who volunteered their time to feed. So then you realize that we need to change a whole lot of structure. So all of that is, like, to me, a lot of learning, so that we could undo some of the things that's already in place, that are actually in place because they're in place because there are probably some rational reason why they're there, but at the same time they're not. They are one of the reasons too why collections are far removed from communities.
Linda, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so if I may, ways we connect with where we get engaged with our local communities is we visit or we participate in local events. So the latest one that we participated in is the Flame Tree Arts Festival, where we saw 5,000 of our community members in a 3-day span It is a local culture event where a lot of our local artisans, artists, traditional practitioners came out, and as well as our local dancers performing performance. So we brought our local, as much as we could, out to a tent and made a makeshift library, mini library, just to showcase and feature what our library has to offer. I tell you how many, such a small island, we probably have about half of those people that were there that didn't even know that they had these collections in the library. So, and that's how we try to engage with our local communities. Just go out, be in big events, and participate as much as we can to educate our community on the variety of collections and the great opportunities that the library has to offer, and they're all free.
Yeah, I love those points. And I feel like this theme around food is very important because I know anytime engagement with local community, having that nourishing aspect is so important to show that care, but also to ensure that the conversation is going down productive pathways. Ray, for you, I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts on when it comes to engaging with data for local community, because at once there is disaggregating the data, but what might be some ways for us to take that disaggregated data and make it legible and interpret it for the communities that it's meant to be for?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So depending on where your data source is, you want to know exactly some of the context behind it, who collected it, how is it collected, and for what purpose, right? And so if it's something you collected intentionally with certain areas, it requires, even before sharing the results, right? Like working with collaborators to discuss what information are you really asking for, right? And if these are your demographics, or maybe there's something that you might be missing from that lens that you need someone to tell you, like maybe these are the questions the way you want to ask. But in general, I think there are other ways to share in terms of narratives, like qualitative methods of information, whether that's through a survey or interview or anecdotes or vignettes that really creates a more compelling narrative. Sometimes the data, it's just the way it's collected, and sometimes you need more than that, the context around it, to share that. As we know, a lot of we live in a society that's data driven, but it's a lot of it is story that lead us to where and what we need to be moved, right, to do. So I think that's the way I'm looking at it now. Certainly, our participatory approach is definitely needed to be an inclusive process.
Thank you for that. I see we did get one question in the chat, and so maybe if folks wanted to share some short remarks on it, and then we'll proceed with the rest of our program. But KL asks, what is some advice you can give to someone who is managing or curating cultural or Indigenous collections that is not of Indigenous ancestry or of Indigenous community upbringing? I could start with a really brief set of remarks, is that something that I've learned and I hope offers a way to move forward for people who aren't necessarily from a specific community but tasked with working with that community, is to learn to learn how to practice skills of deep listening. I think sometimes we have our own assumptions going into community work on what communities need, but oftentimes we have to just take a step back first to really listen into what they're asking of us. Ricky touched upon the invitation being such a key aspect to this work. And I think that is a lesson that not only for non-Indigenous professionals to do, but also something that we as Indigenous professionals also can continue learning more how to do better. So this is my thought on it. Anybody else have any response to the question?
I'd say for me, if you are handling curating or a culture collection from the island here, at least in Chamorro collection, you may want to actually first learn how to ask for a blessing from the ancestors on all the whatever your collections may be. So it's always a practice to ask for a blessing and in respect of the collection that you are handling. So that's my advice. I don't really curate, but that's something that we learn from our upbringing.
For me, it's like there's a lot of resources now on shared stewardship. Maybe read up on what it actually means to perform, that function of shared stewardship, because most of the time, my own experience is that community members do not necessarily want the items back. Like for instance, like in the Philippines, you say, I want to return this basket, and they will tell you, we're still making those baskets. Go to the market and they're there. So, it's best that they're in that museum and, but, so forming those relationships is really important, like knowing those different cultural protocols and having the cultural humility to like basically say, the deep listening and also like changing of perspective, because I do think that being not a member of community is, like we all experience this in many ways, right? Like I always go in white spaces and I don't belong there. And I navigate that. So I feel like, white people should also learn how to navigate that in reverse. And so the other thing that I'm saying is that be prepared to work beyond the confines of your institution and your work hours. Because like, for instance, for Filipinos, there's always potluck, and that means weekend. That means off hours. So like, I know, there's a narrative right now that I don't want to go work beyond the hours. But to me, it's just like, well, if you want to do community-oriented work, there's a whole lot of off-hours work. So you need to negotiate with your institution on how those things would count as work and not just party. Because it's work.
Oh, I just wanted to add in response to also what Ricky mentioned, that years ago, I was an academic librarian in Central Valley in California, and I was able to work with our Cross-Cultural Agenda Center to secure a grant from the American Indian Library Association called Talk Story, Sharing Culture, which is a family literacy program that reaches out to Asian American, Pacific Islander, and American Indian and Alaskan Native families and community members, just doing a public program. And I work closely with that center to identify with the grant, like how we can bring in groups tribal groups from the area. So the Mono people from the Central Valley, there were a couple of oral storytellers, and they were specific about like their times that they could speak, which happened to be on the weekend, which worked out fine for us. But it was really helpful because we were able to bring in the two storytellers and really engage with the community. But it looked like it was just like a simple program, right? You bring in storytellers, but there was a lot of the behind the scenes that people might not realize, which is what all of us here are sharing, like really deep listening, really engaging and understanding what the intentions are, and really making it a way that highlights and uplifts their voices too in relation to this grant. So I just wanted to share that.
On
I
that note,
may
I think
also, one other important aspect that I learned is collaboration. So reaching out to, people who may be in charge of collections and connecting to people and attending conferences, workshop, that actually kind of helps with collaboration and just connecting with people. That's very important. And with that, you never go wrong. You will eventually, connections that you have with people will put you to the right place of whichever indigenous collection you are working with.
thank you, Aranda. And on that note, thank you again to the rest of our panelists. I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. San Nicolas Roca.
And there are a number of students doing a lot of wonderful things in the iSchool at San Jose State University. But for for this symposium, we want to highlight or spotlight a couple of students that are doing things in relation to AA and HPI. And the first one is Jade Dean. And Jade is a student in the San Jose State University MLIS program, so our Master's in Library and Information Science program. She's an active public library volunteer and the lead at a craft brewery. She is the vice chair for the American Library Association student chapter and is currently participating in the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association year-long mentorship program. So Jade is doing a lot of neat things and things that seem to be very interesting to her, and that kind of combines the things that she's doing. And one of the first things is the Boozy Book Fair, a diversity initiative, and sounds super cool. It's collaborating with AAPI women-owned businesses to create spaces that welcome and celebrate diverse clientele. She's also doing more volunteer work, so a festival of AAPI books, facilitating connection between the community and AAPI voices in literature. And some of the outcomes and goals of her work, Jade continues to build her community in libraries and beyond. Volunteering for libraries has introduced her to diverse communities and LIS roles in the Los Angeles area, as well as incorporating partnerships with AAPI and BIPOC businesses in her work is part of her personal brand as an advocate and professional. So thank you so much, Jade, for all the amazing things that you're doing. The next student spotlight would be Kiao George. And Lena, do you want to talk about some of the things that she's doing?
Of course. So I'm happy to be able to talk more and to highlight Kiao George this month on the project that she's working on, Hula, a Library of Libraries. But before that, a little bit more information on Kiao. She's a student in San Jose State University's MLIS program, as well as the Collections and Resource Manager at Hula Preservation Society on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. So one of the projects that she's been working on is, again, Hula, a Library of Libraries, which explores the notions of libraries as living spaces that facilitate knowledge sharing, community learning, and connection, as well as discusses hula or Hawaiian dance of Kanaka Maoli as an embodiment of library. And I am really excited to see this work happening. I know this is years in the making of really thinking about the importance of repositories like hula preservation to the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage. So some of the outcomes and goals of the project that Kiao is working on is to collaborate with others to develop this research. And she actually presented some preliminary findings last year in November at the International Indigenous Librarians Forum, which took place in Honolulu, I believe. And a research paper on this topic will be published in IILF in June 2024. So the research team is also planning to talk more about the research in the forthcoming Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums Conference in November 2024, which I believe is taking place in California. And through this project, Kiao wishes to nurture advocacy for Indigenous communities, support their knowledge and information practices, and encourage change in the core curriculum of LIS academic programs. And if you want to watch a clip of Kiao talking about this research, you can scan the QR code on the screen or visit the YouTube link below. So congrats to Kiao on such incredible work and really community-oriented work. It's great to see.
Thank you, Helena. But congratulations to both students. They're doing some amazing things, and we're happy to share this information with you all. And I hope to see all the amazing things in the future, all the work that they're doing, not just here in the mainland United States, but also in Hawaii. Thank you all so much for being a part of this symposium and listening in. And thank you so much to the panelists for all your presentations and sharing all the amazing things that you're doing. And I had the opportunity to see some of the things that you were doing just through talking with you prior to the symposium, and gone through some walkthroughs, and and watch some videos and things like that. It just all seems so great. And I would love to go and see all of those things at some point. But what's great are all the links to the websites and the videos. And so if we can't make it to Michigan or Hawaii, there's just so many great resources available for all of you all to look at and watch. And I believe everybody has left their contact information. So, and if for whatever reason you weren't able to take a screenshot of their contact information, please feel free to reach out to me.
So a couple of things to share. So first is that this year is the first year in which our first student group in Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. So I'm very proud of Erica and her team for putting together that student group. That's certainly part of our desire to provide that assistance. The other is, and a big thank you to the panelists and everyone that attended, is that our high school is number one, actually, across all races for MLS candidates, and we represent 33% of all AA and HPI students nationally. So this session is going to be, again, a huge contribution to their education. So let's give all of the panelists, again, a loud round of applause for them taking their time, sharing that. I'm humbled. I'm inspired by your work. I'm always very energized after hearing our wonderful panelists. As an EDU, our role is to create these spaces, to have such conversations. And I want to reassure you that we'll be archiving and sharing all of this publicly, so that's findable and searchable, both on our website and YouTube channel. So your words of wisdom will live on and be part of the space of the future. I also want to thank our big team that helped make this happen. So as you probably know, and as Tanya knows, how much hard work goes into creating these symposia. So I want to thank in particular Matsuko Friedland and Nicole Azoff, who are two EDI student writers. Samantha Fedovero for her tech support, who's with us today. Otherwise, we could not function without you. Vivian Zuo, who helped coordinate this. Alfredo Alcantar, who's our campus administrator and Zoom guru. Many of you received his emails. And certainly Nicole Purviance, our director of marketing, in her role in marketing today's event and making it a success. A few other things. We have a series of 3 more symposiums coming up. So Juneteenth Day on June 6th, and that'll be led by Carolyn Norman, the president of the California Librarians Black Caucus. That'll be from 10 to noon. Then we'll be having our Pride Month celebration Thursday, July 11th, also from 10 to noon. And the first ever, we are having our Disability Pride Month, which will be Wednesday, July 17th, from 10 to noon. Finally, our goal of the EDI Symposia is really to surface the voices of diverse communities and to share their worldviews, like what happened. And we are, again, delighted to provide support for those communities and to share them with the entire LIS field to ensure that we can best support those communities. As a final note, in order to support EDI, we must allocate time and resources to doing that hard work to make it a reality in your respective environments. And all of the leaders here are sharing how they're doing that. It's not easy at all, but well worth the effort to attain that high level of being together for us all. I'm the first director of the iSchool of a BIPOC background. We cannot and should not remain silent. Racism towards us is really not our problem, but the problem with the perpetrators themselves. So I do think things are getting better, but we have much more work that needs to be done. We are one of the most diverse nations in the world, and the positive that far outweigh the negative. And I ask that all of us continue to use your voices and actions to help make the world a better place for us all. So again, thank you for joining us. The full transcript and recording and summary of today's event will be available on our EDI website and also our EDI YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us. Our future, your future is in your hands, as was said at our Earth Day Symposium. And I think we're in good shape. I'm very happy that that's the case. So Tanya, do you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you, everyone. I appreciate, you all being here. So thank you. Sus Ma'asi.